It was nice to see finally a Buffalo Soldiers Highway, part of 41, I believe. So the acknowledgments are coming. There are now some great monuments and markers around the country where we're finally getting around to doing it. But when Roosevelt knows they're in San Francisco, that's important for him. It's one of many things he does on this trip that are really almost unchallengeable in terms of presidential history. I'll give you another example. A couple of weeks into this trip, he's away from the White House for 9 weeks. So the White House is essentially a train car. That's where he's conducting business. In a little town called Sharon Springs, Kansas, a little girl, 13-year-old girl named Pearl Gorsuch presents Roosevelt with a 2-week-old baby badger as a gift. Staff moves in and says, "Mr. President, you can't have this." He shoos them away. He adopts the badger, which rides on the train for the next 2 months, makes it back to Washington. And in the book, I unpack the details of what Josiah's fate was. He names the badger Josiah after the little girl's father. So this trip has got all of these kind of crazy twists and turns, from Buffalo Soldiers to baby badgers to this 3-night camping trip with John Muir, where Roosevelt's going to disappear into the backcountry, into the wild. No security, no staff, no press, just he and John Muir and 2 guys, one to tend to the horses and one to tend to the food. You think about that today, nobody knew where the president was for 48 hours. It snows 8 inches the first night. They are not even tent camping. All right. Roosevelt is sleeping on 40 blankets. Muir crafts a bed out of twigs and branches. I mean, this is primitive camping beyond. I was saying the other day, Roosevelt wasn't off the grid. There was no grid to be off of. That's how primitive this was.
The only thing I would push back is I think we can kind of relate to not knowing where your president is. I think we went through that for about 4 years. Not trying to be political or anything, but I don't think anyone knew where Biden was. I think he did, in fact, try to wander off into the wilderness, I believe. Although it was
the
Amazon jungle.
Thing. So
yes.
So maybe that was a callback to Roosevelt's mission.
Yeah, maybe we should have let him go. You know what? You would have been great for spin on that campaign. What? He was checking out, he was about to make it a national park,
Well, I mean, thankfully there is an image of Roosevelt and Muir atop Glacier Point, where you just were, where I just was, Tyrus, a few weeks ago. And to see those 2 men up there on this morning in May 1903, it really is a monumental thing. What people don't realize is this camping trip, over 3 nights of campfires, Roosevelt and Muir basically gave spark to the National Park Service. They had this deep, meaningful conversation where Muir expressed his concerns about what was happening in the wild, why we needed protection. And that's what really puts a lot of this in motion. So the trip itself, for all of its kind of weird twists and turns, there is this kind of ongoing effect that we still feel today in terms of celebrating national parks.
Because he's described as a progressive, right? He was like the first progressive, which he was generally interested in preservation.
Yeah.
And how it has gotten so distorted, and it's like a progressive now, opposed to the original. It's strange how time changes.
Everything's been redefined.
Because the word doesn't mean the same thing anymore as it used to.
No. Back then, there's definitely been a redefinition of the term. And I think back then, Roosevelt was such a rule breaker, such doing things on his own terms. That was a progressive mindset, because he would piss off both parties equally, by doing what he felt was right. And, it's funny, even he becomes president in 1901. There's an interesting tribute to him that happens this same year, 1903. It's the introduction of the teddy bear, which, if people don't know, the year before, 1902, Roosevelt is on a hunting expedition with the governor of Mississippi. He doesn't get a bear. They're bear hunting. So the governor goes out, his staff finds a sick bear cub. They tie it to a willow tree, give Roosevelt his gun and said, "Here you go, Mr. President, have at it." Roosevelt says, "This is ridiculous. This is not hunting. Free the bear." A cartoonist in Washington learns about this, creates this cartoon panel of Roosevelt liberating the bear. And a guy in Brooklyn who owned a candy store had this idea to create something called Teddy's Bear in tribute to that. He writes the White House. Roosevelt says, "Of course you can do that." And that gives birth in 1903 to the teddy bear. Interestingly, he and his wife sell so many teddy bears, this couple in Brooklyn, they create a toy company called the Ideal Toy Company, which becomes essentially the most popular toy company in America, ultimately releasing the Rubik's Cube. I mean, that was something you can tie back to Roosevelt. So I love Theodore Roosevelt stories because it's like a web. You can tie so many origins back to things that we take for granted today.
Why do you think so many things that Roosevelt did maintain the test of time? Because, it's crazy to me when you think about how much impact he had that is still relevant today. I don't think there's a child in America that doesn't have a teddy bear or been access to it. I mean, that's just...
I sleep with one every night.
I think it was his boldness. He was a president of firsts. There's a whole chapter in the book called that.
Was it the four terms, you think?
Pardon?
Would you think it was the four terms?
I think it was the fact that he had guts and he had courage. He was the first president to fly in a plane, to ride in a submarine, to own a telephone, to ride in a car. I mean, he was somebody that always wanted to be the one experiencing things, I also think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he modeled much of his thinking on Abraham Lincoln, who was really one of his heroes. And I think that's also why he resonates, is because the thinking was so solid and so resonant. I mean, when Roosevelt, people don't realize, when he was inaugurated in 1905, he wore a ring with a lock of Lincoln's hair in it. That's the tribute. The ring was given to him by a guy named John Hay, who had been Lincoln's secretary.
I thought you were going to say John Hancock, because that would
No.
Like, wow, the son of a bitch. You don't get to keep the hair.
John Hay is another interesting American figure that a lot of people don't know about. He was Lincoln's secretary when Lincoln was assassinated. He goes on to become Theodore Roosevelt's Secretary of State. So again, his political arc,
there's the connection.
And he gives Lincoln that ring. On this particular trip in the book, I have images of Roosevelt laying a wreath in Springfield at Lincoln's tomb. He unveils plaques at the sites of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. The 1903 Great Loop Tour, there was a lot of Lincoln invested in that. And the thing that really blew my mind is that when he lays the wreath in Springfield, it's not the first time that Theodore Roosevelt is in the presence of Abraham Lincoln's body. I know that sounds weird, but we got to go back to 1865. When Lincoln is assassinated, his body is taken on basically a funeral tour where you can go pay your respects to this horse-drawn carriage, which takes Lincoln's casket through the streets of New York, Boston, Chicago, D.C. In New York, there's a photo that was produced of Union Square, 14th Street and Broadway, Lincoln's casket being drawn down Broadway. And in the window of a building on the corner, in the second floor window, if you blow it up, you can see two little boys looking at the casket. It's Theodore Roosevelt at about 7 years old and his brother. So he and Lincoln have this kind of weird connection over the years that...
almost a destiny.
It really is. And the other part of which I really wanted to connect in the book, connecting all of these dots, is that when Muir and Roosevelt are camping at Yosemite, they are camping at that time in the only park that is federally protected. And it's thanks to Abraham Lincoln, who at the peak of the Civil War signs into act something called the Yosemite Valley Grant Act, protecting Yosemite. And people wonder, how would Abraham Lincoln even know about Yosemite? He never came to California. And that gets back to this other really great untold story in the book about a photographer named Carlton Watkins, who in the 1850s he gets his money together. He's from New York, moves to California during the gold rush to try and make money. Earns some money to buy a camera and becomes the first guy to really document Yosemite. He's sort of the Ansel Adams of the 1850s. A New York City art gallery has an exhibit of his pictures. A California senator sees the pictures, shows them to Lincoln, and Lincoln is so inspired, it pushes him to create that act. So there are lots of these untold stories that get to preservation, to conservation, to really understanding the importance of environmentalism and everything that Roosevelt was all about.
Go ahead. You had questions?
I just had a quick question, Chris, about the pushback in Theodore Roosevelt's conservation. So he was obviously like a big part of preserving the national parks. What was the pushback like?
Well, at that point, there wasn't a lot of pushback because it was a new concept. I mean, John Muir is Roosevelt saying to Muir, what are the problems? What do we need to know about? Muir begins talking about things like logging and poachers and things like that. And that gets Roosevelt thinking about what he can start doing. So there really wasn't a lot of pushback up front. As soon as Roosevelt gets back to D.C., you can look, it's a matter of record, the number of bills he began signing, protecting millions, tens of millions of acres changes in the United States, creating some of the first national parks. The national parks are born officially in 1916, but all of that momentum from Roosevelt and Muir and a gentleman named Stephen Mather are kind of what get us there. So there's really not a lot of pushback because it's a new idea. Back then, everybody thought everything was going to last forever and there were no threats. Thanks to John Muir calling this to Roosevelt's attention, we begin to see this movement. So fortunately, there wasn't a lot of pushback back then. It was still pretty much an open field where you could go and push this kind of environmentalism.
Wasn't it also that during that time, it was when you were elected, the job of the House and the Senate was to work with you? It wasn't this. Yeah. There wasn't this, I'm just, because my side didn't win, I'm going to fight everything you do. It was kind of like, okay, it's your show, and we'll pick and choose. But generally, the general consensus was to. And how many people be like, no, I don't want pristine wilderness saved for future generations. That's ridiculous. My nephew and son-in-law are loggers. We need that. We need those sequoias and redwoods.
Yeah.
Because do you think had he not done that, would we have those forests today?
No, I don't. I think there would have been. I think you needed that to happen when it happened, because there was, California with the gold rush, there was a lot of development and a lot of encroachment. But to your point about polarization, I totally agree. I mean, the beauty of the 1903 Roosevelt trip, which had never been done before, will never be done again. I mean, a 9-week trip across America was essentially nonpartisan. It wasn't an election year. The 24 states Roosevelt visits, he knows he's pretty much got those states. So what you see in the press coverage, and this is in the book as well, both sides were cheering this on. It was fun because all of a sudden, dozens of small towns were getting to see a president up close and personal. Roosevelt is giving between 6 to 8 speeches per day, pulling the train up and doing these whistle-stop talks in towns of population 100, or in Berkeley, where he gives the commencement to 10,000 people, everything in between. So both sides really embraced this trip because it was a chance for everyday Americans to get up close and personal with the president. This is, I think, 12 years before microphones were invented. So all 6 to 8 speeches per day, Roosevelt is delivering just his voice. That's why in the images in the book, you see him yelling and projecting. It's an entirely different age. To be a politician then, the physicality of it was very different. You had to be a great orator to succeed. You had to be essentially... And
they weren't short speeches.
No.
No, there was some long ass speeches.
There were long speeches. That's a great point too. Is the range? He would write. Yeah. He would improvise. He would write things. It was really feeling it in the moment. But I'll tell you this: when he gets to California, something happens. The minute he hits the desert, you can read in his words that something is changing. The minute he sees the Pacific Ocean, the first sequoia, everything he begins, appreciating in California is a very big deal to him. And you get this sense along the trip, and this is all in the book, of this excitement that he's got, all leading up to the meeting with John Muir.
Well, one of the things that because of his childhood, and he grew up very sickly.
Yeah.
And it was a good chance that he probably wasn't going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that had a big effect on his psyche in terms of he never really feared death?
No.
And even when he actually, and the reason why I mentioned the long speeches, because they had to roll him up and fold him up, and he had thick pieces of paper, and it was actually the first Bulletproof Vest was one of his speeches.
Yeah.
Because he was shot, and if it wasn't for his speech, that'd have been it.
And he finished the speech.
He finished the damn speech. Yeah. He finished this. That's not. And now when I hear it's a first world problem, Harry's like, "Hey, the Wi-Fi's down. We're not going to do the show today."
No.
Like, how do you measure that to that?
No,
I'm going to be honest. I don't know if maybe you would. I don't know if I'd finish the speech that they were shooting at.
Well, I can't finish this podcast when I get mustard on my pants.
Yeah, just imagine being shot and be like, furthermore.
Tyrus, you bring up a great point. I do think that the pain he suffered as a young person, I mean, look, there's the physical pain, there's the emotional pain. He loses his mom and wife on the same day, on Valentine's Day. And I do think that everything he endured, all the conflict, absolutely pushed him to take every single day and squeeze the life out of it.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you just saw, don't stop there. You can catch the full conversations right here, only on Planet Tyrus. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And you don't want to miss what's next. I'm telling you, bad things will happen. Oh, I'm just playing. Nothing bad's going to happen, but I won't be your friend.